The FBI agent looked at me like I was a master criminal. "Mrs. Davidson, you've been running one of the largest dark web drug operations on the East Coast from your kitchen table," he said, holding up my laptop. I stared at him in confusion. "Officer, I don't even know how to change my Wi-Fi password, let alone run a drug operation. I use this computer for online bingo and cat videos." My name is Dorothy Davidson, and at 69 years old, I thought the most excitement I'd see in my retirement would be winning the church raffle or maybe getting a new flavor at the frozen yogurt shop downtown. I certainly never expected to wake up at 6 in the morning to 20 federal agents surrounding my modest craftsman house in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood, treating me like some kind of international cybercriminal. It started when my doorbell rang before sunrise on a drizzly Tuesday morning in October. Seattle was doing what Seattle does best, drizzling steadily while the fog rolled off Puget Sound, creating that perpetual dampness that soaks into your bones. I shuffled to the front door in my fuzzy slippers and my favorite Reading is Fundamental nightgown, expecting maybe a package delivery or perhaps my neighbor Marcus needing to borrow something again. He'd been doing that a lot lately. Instead, I found myself face to face with what looked like a small army. Men and women in dark jackets with FBI printed in bold yellow letters across their backs, their faces grim and professional. Behind them, I could see unmarked cars lining my quiet residential street, their red and blue lights cutting through the morning mist like something out of a crime drama I might watch on television. "Dorothy Davidson?" the lead agent asked, though it sounded more like a statement than a question. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd seen everything the criminal world had to offer. "Yes," I said, clutching my coffee mug tighter, the ceramic warm against my palms. "Is everything all right? Has something happened to one of my neighbors? Is Marcus okay?" "Ma'am, I'm Agent Sarah Mitchell with the FBI's Cyber Crimes Division. We have a federal warrant to search these premises in connection with an ongoing investigation into cybercrime, money laundering, and international drug trafficking." I blinked at her, certain I'd misheard. The words seemed to bounce around in my head without making sense. "I'm sorry, did you say drug trafficking? There must be some terrible mistake. This is 847 Northwest 65th Street. I'm a retired librarian. The strongest substance in my house is my arthritis medication, and I have to get that approved by my doctor every 3 months." Agent Mitchell held up an official-looking document with multiple seals and signatures. "According to our 18-month investigation, this address has been identified as the central hub of significant illegal activity. Multiple dark web marketplaces, cryptocurrency exchanges, and international drug distribution networks have been traced directly back to your internet connection, Mrs. Davidson." I looked past her at the army of agents already putting on latex gloves and opening equipment cases that looked like something NASA might use. "I think you want my neighbor's house. Marcus Wilson lives next door at 849. He's always doing something with computers and electronics. I hear him typing away at all hours." "Mrs. Davidson," Agent Mitchell said with the patience of someone who'd had this conversation before, "our cyber forensics team has spent months tracing illegal activity. Every single transaction, every criminal communication, every illegal file transfer has been traced directly to your IP address. The crimes are being committed from inside this house, using your internet connection." The words hit me like a physical blow. IP address. I'd heard the term before, but had no idea what it meant. All I knew was that these very serious people with badges and guns thought I was some kind of criminal mastermind. What followed was the most humiliating and terrifying 6 hours of my life. Federal agents systematically went through every inch of my home, treating my personal belongings like potential evidence in a major criminal case. They photographed my ancient desktop computer, which I used primarily for email and online word games. They examined my tablet, which my grandson had given me last Christmas for reading books and watching Netflix. They even looked through my kitchen drawers, apparently searching for hidden hard drives, cryptocurrency wallets, or whatever other mysterious criminal paraphernalia they thought a grandmother might hide next to her measuring spoons.
"Ma'am," Agent Mitchell said, setting up what looked like a mobile command center right there in my living room, complete with laptops, monitors, and equipment I couldn't begin to identify. "Can you walk me through your typical daily computer usage? Start from when you wake up and tell me everything you do online." I felt absolutely ridiculous explaining my simple digital routine to a federal agent who probably fought international crime syndicates for a living, but I did my best. "Well, I usually check my email first thing in the morning to see if my daughter in Portland has sent any pictures of my granddaughter. Then I might play a few games of online solitaire or bingo. There's this nice website called AARP Games that has gentle versions. Sometimes I look up recipes on Pinterest, though I can never figure out how to save them properly. In the evenings, I watch cat videos on YouTube or video call my daughter using that Zoom thing she taught me during the pandemic." Agent Mitchell made detailed notes on her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. "Do you use any encrypted messaging applications? WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, Wicker?" "I don't know what those are," I admitted, feeling more foolish by the minute. "Have you ever purchased anything online using cryptocurrency? Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero?" "I don't know what that is either. I barely figured out how to use my debit card on Amazon, and that took my grandson 3 visits to teach me." She turned her tablet toward me, showing a complex web of data that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Lines connecting dots, numbers streaming across screens, charts that meant absolutely nothing to me. "Mrs. Davidson, according to our monitoring systems, your internet connection has been used to facilitate millions of dollars in illegal transactions over the past 18 months. Drug sales, stolen credit card information, counterfeit documents, weapons trafficking, human trafficking, money laundering for international cartels. The list goes on and on." I sat down heavily in my favorite recliner, the one my husband had given me for our 40th anniversary, feeling completely overwhelmed and frightened. "Agent Mitchell, I swear to you on my late husband's grave, I have no idea what you're talking about. The most illegal thing I've done recently is accidentally keep a library book past its due date, and I felt guilty about that for weeks." She studied my face carefully, and I could see her trying to reconcile the grandmother sitting in front of her with the criminal mastermind her investigation had suggested. "Mrs. Davidson, I believe you, but that raises an even more serious question. Who else has access to your Wi-Fi network? Who else knows your password?" That's when the uncomfortable realization began to dawn on me, creeping in like the Seattle fog that was getting thicker outside my windows. As Agent Mitchell's question hung in the air, my mind began racing through the past 18 months, and a deeply uncomfortable realization started to form. Marcus Wilson had been my neighbor for 3 years, ever since he'd moved into the rental house next door. He was a quiet man in his early 40s, always polite, always willing to help with small tasks around my house. He'd fixed my front steps when they became loose, helped me bring in groceries during the worst of the pandemic lockdowns, and even set up my new smart television when I'd finally upgraded from my old tube TV last year. Marcus had seemed like a godsend, honestly. After my husband Harold passed away 5 years ago, I'd struggled with many of the household maintenance tasks that he'd always handled. Marcus had appeared at just the right time, offering assistance with a genuine smile and never asking for anything in return. Or so I'd thought. About 18 months ago, and now the timeline was making horrible sense, Marcus had knocked on my door with what seemed like a perfectly reasonable request. His internet service had been cut off due to what he called a billing dispute with Comcast, he'd explained, looking genuinely distressed. He needed internet access for job hunting and handling important emails related to his late mother's estate. Could he possibly use my Wi-Fi temporarily, just until he got his service restored? I'd felt genuinely sorry for him. In my generation, we helped our neighbors without question. When someone needed assistance, you provided it without expecting anything in return. That was simply how decent people behaved. My own parents had lived through the Great Depression, and they taught me that community and mutual aid were what got people through difficult times. So I'd given him my Wi-Fi password without a second thought. It was Harold 1952, my late husband's name and birth year. Simple, easy to remember, and Marcus was so grateful. He'd promised it would only be for a week or two, just until he sorted out his billing issues. But the weeks had turned into months, and whenever I gently asked about his internet situation, Marcus always had a new excuse. The technician hadn't shown up, there was a problem with the line to his house, the company was giving him the runaround because of his credit score. Each explanation sounded plausible, and Marcus was always so apologetic about the continued imposition. "Agent Mitchell," I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper, "my neighbor Marcus has been using my Wi-Fi for the past 18 months. He said his internet was cut off and he needed temporary access." Agent Mitchell's expression sharpened immediately. "Marcus Wilson, age 43, residing at 849 Northwest 65th Street. "Yes, that's him. How did you—" "Mrs. Davidson, Marcus Wilson is the primary target of our investigation. We've been tracking him for 2 years across multiple states. He's wanted for running one of the largest dark web criminal enterprises we've ever encountered." The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the arms of my chair, feeling dizzy and nauseous. "But he's such a helpful young man. He fixes things for me. He brought me soup when I had the flu." "That's exactly how he operates," Agent Mitchell explained, her voice becoming gentler as she saw my distress. "Wilson targets elderly individuals, particularly widows, in quiet neighborhoods. He establishes himself as a helpful neighbor, gains their trust, and then uses their internet connections to commit his crimes. This way, if law enforcement traces the illegal activity, it leads back to innocent people like you instead of him." Over the next hour, as the search of my house continued around us, Agent Mitchell explained the full scope of what had been happening literally next door to me for the past year and a half. Marcus Wilson wasn't just some small-time internet criminal. He was running what the FBI considered one of the most sophisticated cybercriminal operations they'd ever encountered. Using my innocent Wi-Fi connection, Marcus had been operating multiple dark web marketplaces where people could buy everything from illegal drugs to stolen credit card information to forged identity documents. He'd been laundering money for international drug cartels, running cryptocurrency scams that had defrauded victims out of millions of dollars, and even facilitating human trafficking operations across 3 continents. The beauty of his scheme, from a criminal perspective, Agent Mitchell explained, is that every single crime appears to originate from your address. When we trace the IP address, when we follow the digital breadcrumbs, when we analyze the network traffic, it all points here, to 847 Northwest 65th Street, to a 69-year-old retired librarian who plays online bingo. The agents had been monitoring my internet connection for months, building what they thought was an airtight case against me. They'd recorded thousands of illegal transactions, intercepted communications between criminal organizations, and documented financial transfers totaling over $30 million. All of it appearing to come from my modest craftsman house, where I spent my days reading romance novels and tending to my small garden. "Mrs. Davidson," Agent Mitchell continued, "if we hadn't come here today and seen the reality of your situation, you would have been arrested, charged, and likely convicted of crimes that carry sentences of 30 years to life in federal prison. Wilson's plan was nearly perfect." I felt sick to my stomach. The idea that I could have spent the rest of my life in prison for crimes I didn't even understand was terrifying beyond words. But even worse was the betrayal. The fact that someone I'd trusted, someone I'd tried to help, had been willing to destroy my life to protect his own criminal enterprise. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Now we catch Marcus Wilson," Agent Mitchell said grimly, "and you're going to help us do it." The plan Agent Mitchell outlined was both simple and terrifying. I would act as if nothing had happened, pretending that the FBI raid was related to some kind of mistaken identity that had been quickly cleared up. Meanwhile, the agents would set up sophisticated monitoring equipment to track every move Marcus made online, gathering the evidence they needed to arrest him and dismantle his entire criminal network. The key, Agent Mitchell explained as her team discreetly installed monitoring equipment throughout my house, is that Wilson doesn't realize we know about him. If he thinks his cover is blown, he'll disappear. These cybercriminals have escape plans, new identities, offshore bank accounts, safe houses in countries without extradition treaties. If Marcus runs, we may never catch him, and he'll just set up shop somewhere else with a new elderly victim. The monitoring equipment was incredible, tiny cameras and listening devices that were completely invisible, network analyzers that could track every piece of data flowing through my internet connection, and recording systems that would capture everything Marcus said or did. Within hours, my quiet little house had been transformed into a high-tech FBI surveillance operation, though you'd never know it by looking. Mrs. Davidson, Agent Mitchell said as the setup neared completion, I need you to understand the risks here. Marcus Wilson is facing life in prison without the possibility of parole. When criminals get desperate, they can become dangerous. Are you sure you're willing to do this? I thought about Harold, my husband of 45 years, and what he would have done in this situation. Harold had served in Vietnam and later worked as a police officer for 30 years. He'd always believed that good people had a responsibility to stand up against criminals, regardless of the personal cost. I could almost hear his voice. Dorothy, if you don't stop him, he'll just find another sweet old lady to destroy. I'm sure, I said with more conviction than I felt. This man tried to ruin my life. He needs to be stopped.
For the next 2 weeks, I lived the strangest existence of my life. On the surface, everything appeared normal. I maintained my regular routine, morning coffee while checking email, afternoon walks around the neighborhood, evening phone calls with my daughter. But underneath, my house had become mission control for a federal investigation into international cybercrime. Agent Mitchell visited daily, disguised as various service people, a cable repair technician, a home health aide, a contractor giving estimates for roof work. Each visit allowed her to check the monitoring equipment and brief me on what they discovered about Marcus's activities. The scope of his criminal empire was staggering. Using my Wi-Fi connection, Marcus was simultaneously running drug marketplaces that generated millions in revenue, operating cryptocurrency exchanges that laundered money for organized crime syndicates, and managing identity theft rings that had victimized thousands of innocent people across the country. Yesterday alone, Agent Mitchell told me during one of her visits, he processed over $2 million in illegal transactions. He sold stolen credit card information that belonged to over 500 people, facilitated the sale of enough fentanyl to kill thousands, and helped launder money for a human trafficking operation based in Eastern Europe. The monitoring equipment had also revealed the personal side of Marcus's deception. In recorded conversations with his criminal associates, he laughed about me, referring to me as the perfect patsy and the clueless old bird next door. He bragged about how easy it had been to manipulate me, how he'd played the role of the helpful neighbor to perfection. One recording was particularly hurtful. Marcus was talking to someone about his long-term plans. The beauty is that Dorothy will never figure it out. She's too old and too stupid to understand technology. I could probably run this operation for another 10 years before anyone catches on. And if the heat ever gets too intense, I'll just plant some evidence in her house and let her take the fall. Who's going to believe a sweet little grandma is innocent when the FBI finds drug money and hard drives full of illegal files in her basement? The end came suddenly on a rainy Thursday morning that started like any other. I was in my kitchen making coffee when Marcus knocked on my door, something he'd done hundreds of times over the past 3 years. But this time, Agent Mitchell and her team were listening to every word. "Morning, Dorothy," Marcus said with his usual friendly smile when I opened the door. "I was wondering if I could borrow your internet for a few minutes. Mine's acting up again, and I have an important video call for a job interview." It was the same lie he'd been telling for 18 months, but now I knew the truth. Instead of accessing job search websites, Marcus would be coordinating drug sales, laundering money for terrorists, and destroying more innocent lives. "Of course, Marcus," I said, trying to keep my voice steady.
You know the password. Harold 1952, he said with a grateful smile. You're a lifesaver, Dorothy. I don't know what I'd do without such a wonderful neighbor. As Marcus headed toward his house, Agent Mitchell's voice came through the tiny earpiece I was wearing. He's online now. We're recording everything. Just act natural. For the next hour, I watched through my kitchen window as Marcus committed federal crimes using my internet connection. The FBI's monitoring systems tracked every illegal transaction, recorded every criminal communication, and documented every piece of evidence they needed to ensure his conviction. Then Agent Mitchell's voice came through my earpiece again. It's time. Stay inside and away from the windows. At exactly 11:30 a.m., 20 FBI agents surrounded Marcus's house. The arrest was swift and professional. Marcus Wilson, the helpful neighbor who had nearly destroyed my life, was taken into custody without incident. The trial of Marcus Wilson became one of the largest cybercrime cases in FBI history. Over the course of 18 months using my Wi-Fi connection, he had generated over $50 million in criminal revenue, victimized thousands of innocent people, and operated criminal networks spanning 6 countries. Agent Mitchell testified about how Marcus had specifically targeted me because of my age, my widow status, and my trusting nature. The prosecution played recordings of Marcus laughing about my gullibility and bragging about how he planned to let me take the blame if he ever got caught. Marcus was convicted on 87 federal charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His criminal associates, spread across the globe, were also arrested in coordinated raids. The FBI estimated that shutting down his operation prevented millions of dollars in future crimes and saved countless lives that would have been destroyed by the drugs he was trafficking. For my cooperation with the investigation, the FBI provided me with a victim impact statement that helped me understand how I'd been manipulated and exploited. They also arranged for counseling to help me process the betrayal and trauma of learning that someone I'd trusted had tried to destroy my life. The hardest part wasn't the fear or the legal proceedings, it was the loss of trust. For months after Marcus's arrest, I found myself suspicious of every kind gesture, every offer of help from neighbors or strangers. The man who had brought me soup when I was sick, who had fixed my front steps and helped with my groceries, had been planning to let me die in prison for his crimes. But gradually, with the help of my daughter, my church community, and a wonderful therapist who specialized in helping crime victims, I began to heal. I learned that Marcus Wilson was a predator who had exploited my kindness, but that didn't mean I had to become cynical or stop trusting people entirely. I changed my Wi-Fi password to something much more complex, a random string of letters and numbers that Agent Mitchell helped me create. I learned about internet security, identity protection, and how to recognize the signs of cyber manipulation. Most importantly, I learned that being a victim of crime doesn't make you weak or foolish. It makes you a survivor. I'm Dorothy Davidson. I'm 69 years old, and I helped the FBI take down one of the most dangerous cybercriminals in American history. The man next door tried to destroy my life, but instead, I helped destroy his criminal empire. Sometimes the most ordinary people find themselves in the most extraordinary situations. And sometimes a grandmother's Wi-Fi password becomes the key to bringing down an international criminal organization.